Welcome to the Upside Podcast, powered by Upside Global and hosted by Julian Blinn, founder and CEO of Upside Global. The Upside Podcast is listened to weekly by over 6,000 sports and tech executives from all sports leagues and teams in the United States and around the world. Julian has been developing technologies for professional sports teams for over 10 years and has worked for major tech companies along with sports tech startups. In each episode, Julian interviews global leaders in sports to share knowledge on emerging technology in the sports industry and how these technologies can help improve the performance of individuals and organizations, both on and off the playing field. And now here's your host, Julian Blinn.
So today we have the honor of interviewing a group of experts in the science of movements in elite sports. So I'll just make some quick introduction. So first we have Abdul Sillah, an experienced performance coach. Abdul has worked with athletes such as Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka, just to name a few. So welcome back, Abdul.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
It's great to have you back. And then we have Brijesh Patel, Associate Athletic Director, Director of Athletic Performance at Quinnipiac University and the NCAA team. So welcome as well, Brijesh.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And then we have Dr. Ryan Ting, who's the founder of RNA Sports. He's also an MD, MPH, and medical director at Dr. Ting Orthopedic Surgery and Sports Medicine. So welcome back, Ryan.
Thank you for having me.
Great. It's great to have you as well. And then we have Marc Drobenko, ATC and DNSP, who's also a former assistant athletic trainer in college and professional sports. So welcome as well.
Thank you for having me, Julian.
No problem. So, hey guys, so we have a lot to cover today. So I'm just going to jump right into the question. So first question to you guys is, how has the science of movement, in your opinion, evolved in the last 5 to 10 years across elite sports like the NBA, NHL, professional tennis, and what's driving that evolution? Anybody wants to start?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I think over the last 5 to 10 years, I think we've seen a massive shift in trying to keep players healthy. I think that's ultimately what's trying to drive this. And you asked what's driving that evolution. I think number one is job security. I think sports is a big business and it's a big money, and a lot of people want to try to keep their jobs or try to, help themselves make a little bit more money. And I think at the root of that is we're dealing with and we're working with high-level athletes. And if you can look at it from a business sense, they're assets. Right? Yeah. And so we need to try to keep these assets on the field, on the court, on the ice, so that ultimately we can give the organization that we work with the best opportunity and best chance to be successful. And I've seen it change from the emphasis on movement screens that get started with FMS and Y balances and different orthopedic table assessments, and how that's kind of evolved into using force plate data and using high-speed cameras to try to assess movement. Different disciplines have come and have evolved from physical therapy, and they've kind of made their way into the training field, whether it be RPR, PRI, DNS, like Marc is. All these disciplines that have tried to attack compensation patterns and tried to look at dysfunction as a whole. And ultimately, they've looked at movement quality. And I think it's evolved from there to where we've got technology such as GPS monitors that have really looked at quantifying movement and quantifying what the external loads being placed upon the athletes, and ultimately what is the cost of movement and how can we ultimately better improve plans. So in a roundabout way, I think it started from job security and trying to keep athletes healthy. We've evolved from different types of things that help address movement quality as well as movement quantity. What's the best? I don't know. I think it's a combination of everything. I do know what's evolved, in my opinion. I think sometimes we lose sight of the qualitative side of things in developing our eyes, developing our feel with the individual athletes that we work with. And I think it's trying to be replaced by the quantity and the numbers per se. And sometimes it's often difficult to address and try to enhance and teach some of these movements based off of numbers by themselves, because we've seen it. We've seen athletes try to cheat a jump mat, try to cheat a sprint, and they'll change their mechanics when that may not be the most efficient way to move to try to keep them healthy. but they'll try to organize themselves and figure out different ways to try to beat a test or beat a number. So I think it's a combination of both. And I think it comes down to the artistry of coaching to understand what it is that we're trying to help the athlete improve so we can try to keep them healthy.
Now, when you say job security, you mean like practitioners are afraid of, well, I mean, losing their job because they want to make sure that the player's not going to get hurt. They're going to lose their job. Is that what you meant by that or no?
Yeah, yes, 100%. Yeah, I think from my opinion, from what I've seen is a lot of strength coaches or a lot of the sports sciences evolved from trying to quantify what's happening in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And by trying to figure out what's happening in practice, we can try to give information back to our coaches that we work with to try to help them design more efficient practices. And oftentimes in the college setting, sometimes a lot of college coaches like to do a lot. Like they like to do a lot of volume. And sometimes they like to teach discipline and all these things at the same time. And there's a time and place for all that. But what I've found is that using some of the technology that's used to quantify movement is try to be integrated as a checks and balances type system. It's almost to cover their own ass and say, hey, I think we need to peel back at this time. I think we're doing too much. So that's what I mean by job security.
And so just an anecdote on that. Someone told me, I was talking to an NHL agent, the other day, and he said, I said, well, I reach out to an NHL team. And then the practitioner was like, I'm not interested in that. And I was like, that's interesting because I would think that this one technology could help a big problem that they have. And he was said, look, I'm not interested. And the NHL agent said, I think he's afraid of losing his job. It's like you're putting a microscope on something and he doesn't want this thing to blow up, right? With management, you know what I mean? And maybe, and I thought that's interesting because I never thought about this, but anyway, that makes sense. And I know Abdul's got a pretty strong opinion about the data, right? The use of data. And when you overuse it, then sometimes you feel like the players are using that to say, look, I'm tired. I don't really want to do it today. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that makes sense. So thank you, Brijesh. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I think Coach B mentioned great points. At the youth level, it's almost an analogy in terms of the professional level, it's job security, but at youth level, it's it's position or making the roster security. You have parents who are constantly calling me or talk to me about how can we get my daughter, my son to objectively jump higher, be faster, be stronger, right? We live in Silicon Valley, Fremont, California. So we're in their backyard. Data talks, data driven, right? So for us, although objectives don't lie, numbers don't lie, I think it's the quality of the data, right? Not the quantity, just like Coach B said, but it's the evolution of what has happened over the 5 to 10 years. There's been more data collection, I will say. There's been more development of technology, I will say. But I would say they're still missing the mark in terms of how well you can translate the data, right? And I think, again, Coach B mentioned it, hit it right on the head on the nail, is with the fact that you can understand the root cause for our practice. You can understand the root causes of the injury. That's what should drive in how you can leverage that data to reverse symptoms, to acknowledge, look, can we use objective measurements for one aspect, one variable for the solution and all be all? I would say no. For athletes who are coached by sports performance trainers or strength and conditioning coaches, if you hit hone and just drive performance-based results, right? You might have an athlete who's extremely explosive, but then at what risks are they facing, right? So you have to, the two parameters we always stress on is body mechanics and body control. So biomechanics and body control. If you compromise those two from an orthopedic level, you tend to increase your risk of overuse chronic injuries, such as soft tissue in the lower extremities, right? In the upper extremities, we have athletes who are volleyball players, pitchers, quarterbacks, throwers. They have increased risk of injury with overuse. But in my opinion, overuse injuries are self-inflicted, which means if, like I gave the analogy on our first podcast, Julian,
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember,
Mhm.
when I think you asked me, explain to how your program addresses injury prevention proactively. So if you take Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime and you take Muhammad Ali in his prime, both heavyweight champs in their respective fields, right? And you put them in a boxing ring, and we take all this data, all this new AI driven wearables or not wearables, and we look at joint angles, asymmetries, force of absorption, right? Eccentric load. And the regimen is you take these two heavyweight champs and you put them in a ring, and the regimen is jump for 1,000 jump ropes. So your rep count is 1,000 every day for 30 days. And then we bring these two athletes in to our clinic and we interview them and we assess them. We do the whole workup, x-rays, MRIs, everything, soft tissue, inflammation. Who do you think is going to be in the most pain or most inflamed? I would argue Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Same rep count. You go over to the next exam table, Muhammad Ali sitting there, smiling, cheerful, and you ask him, Muhammad, are you in pain? And he's like, no, I can go another 1,000 reps. So how do you compare the two? I would say Muhammad Ali, in terms of his weight distribution, his balance, his dynamic and functional movement, he is more tuned and more keen on his awareness with his leverage, his force of absorption, his impact with landing, and his athleticism than Arnold Schwarzenegger in a squat rack. Not saying he can't jump rope. Both gentlemen are effective, but who's more efficient and who's more counterproductive? So then the clinician who's the orthopedic surgeon, like my father, I would say there needs to be more ownership on them clinically to address the root cause of the injury. Because a lot of times in Western medicine, the clinician will say reactively, oh, let's give him a cortisone shot, PRP, let's schedule him 2 weeks of rehab for strengthening. It would be a complete, I think it would be absurd to say to Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime that he needs strengthening in his quads and calves to get rid of his patella tendonitis, right? So that's what we tell our youth. That's what we tell our pros. It's just, can we create awareness to understand the root causes of these injuries, to reverse pain symptoms and address those two factors, variables that I believe are more important than objective numbers, which is body control and biomechanics. And like Coach B said, it takes a keen eye to pick that up, because the higher elite you are, the smaller the margin of error. And that precision is when you're dealing with an athlete like Serena Williams, like Coach Sillah, or versus an athlete who might not be as explosive and as strong as Serena, right? So you're talking thresholds, you're talking load management. Load management is overemphasized in the clinic, in the clinical setting. They'll say actually 2 to 4 weeks rest, then the athlete gets deconditioned, right? So you're killing them in terms of their mental engagement. Their mental health goes down because they're frustrated and disappointed. You remove them from their sport, and now they're doing stretch bands, and I would say respectfully, exercises that may not translate as well as Coach B's program or Coach Marc's program, right? So we need to do better in terms of functional and dynamic movement, and I think simply analyze the root causes of the injury, and then that will reverse the pain symptoms.
Yep, that makes sense. Well said. Thank you, Ryan. Anybody else? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, those are unbelievable points by both Ryan and Coach B. And just to add a little bit on top of that, in regards to like the data, it helps decision making to a point, right? But that's where Coach B brought in the artistry of coaching, right? One coach might be able to take that data, go one direction, whereas another coach is going to take it into other direction that might be more effective for that athlete or team. But back to the movement science, it's like this is not my quote, but I heard it from Dr. Craig Levinson, who's out from LA, and it says you have to move well and then move often, right? And then if you do those two, then you load the correct movement patterns. Well, that's how you're going to create a robust, system. Interesting point by Dr. Ryan is like, we're not going to tell Arnold Schwarzenegger he needs strengthening of his quads, but as you were discussing that, I wonder how many single leg squats to a box can Arnold Schwarzenegger do? Would we see some discrepancies there versus Muhammad, So those are just some of the points that I was thinking of with some of the things that you guys were discussing. But the other thing is, regards to moving well, it's like at the higher levels, I really pay attention to how do you move under extreme stress? Do your patterns change? Does your breathing patterns change? Are your eyes like just all over the place? You're trying to fixate yourself on something. What I've noticed in the huddles that I've been a part of, the elite players, their breathing is under control and their eyes are focused on the play that's being drawn up by the coach. The ones that are having a little bit of trouble, that aren't performing at high levels, I've noticed their eyes are away from the huddle. That's just an observation of mine. But it's interesting that I've been able to correlate that to who moves well and who's performing at a higher level for longer and who's more sustainable.
Great comment, Mark. Yep, that makes sense. Abdul, any thoughts on that as well?
Yes, I mean, Coach B, Dr. Ryan, and Mark made a great point, actually. I mean, as Julian was saying, I think we are going now from athlete. I know all of us are athletes, going away from what we used to do, what we learned how to do and how we did it, into guys that now are in the lab. They're becoming the guys that everybody lean on, and it's taken away from the creativity, from the eye itself, because the eye will never lie. The individual that you're working with, you can always know the cue and the keys on what's happening, what's going on, if they're fatigued, if injury is about to happen, right? So I think our dependency on the lab is the problem, because most of these guys, I'm not disrespecting them, but I don't think they spend as much quality time on the field as we have, right? And we know, we've experienced it. We know what cost us and what didn't cost us, and we know how to eyeball and how to watch out for things. And I think that's where we slowly. I think the past 5 to 10 years, that's where things are going. That I think is, I believe, there's an imbalance there.
So based on what you just said, and I think Brijesh said that as well, and even Mark, right? I mean, you all say that, all of you guys. Can you tell when an athlete's about to get injured, or he got hurt, and going back and think, what, I could tell, like something was off when he got on the field, something was not going right, and he got hurt, the next game. Like, you remember like situations like that where you could tell, like, hey, the motion, the movement, something wasn't right.
Yes,
Yeah.
like I used to have a
100%.
towel around my neck when any of my Serena, Naomi are playing, Bianca. I'll put a towel around my neck. If I notice anything, I'm throwing the towel on the court. It means we're done. Period. We're not taking chance, right? That's because I trust myself that much. I'm not trusting anyone else, because I'm the one that's with these guys all day long, right? And like you said, they're assets, and their body is what makes them money. So we are the guardians of these players. So, and we have to be that, not the person that's sitting in the lab reading notes. I believe so, right? And I think that's what we lean in more, and that's what Dr. Ryan was talking more about, that I really appreciate, is that aspect of it. It's like knowing that the awareness and trusting us rather than trusting this data so much more.
And do you feel like sometimes the athletes better than they know themselves?
Yes, the athlete, and that's where that communication is very important. I think the athlete know themselves more than anything. I mean, every doctor you go to, the first thing they do is ask you themselves. I mean, Dr. Ryan will say the same thing. Every time you see an athlete, the first thing you do is ask him or her, how you feeling? What do you think? Then from there, he can make his assessment. He goes from there, right? From his professional viewpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else has any comment before I jump to the next question?
I just to hone in on what Coach has said, I think it's a beautiful thing. The numbers don't lie, right? And we need the data. So it's an interpretation of how we translate the data is, I think, what is the critical component to all this. you can collect all this data, but is it being utilized to translate what we're trying to accomplish? From our standpoint, we put more emphasis on the injury. We want all this, like exactly what Coach has said. Subjectively, how are you feeling today? And obviously, athletes know their body the best, but it's no longer. We're not defying the fact that or denying the fact that it takes grit and grind to perform and to compete. We're just saying you have to adapt and adjust and get it right, or you're just going to have an endless pain cycle where you work, get injured, and then you're like, okay, then we have to shut her down or shut them down, and then pain symptoms go away, or they do a PT program, and then obviously you remove the stress point, you take them off the court, right? Just to go back 4 weeks later and the pain comes back. So you have to address the root causes of the injury is the most important thing. Over the years, though, too, I've seen, maybe Coach B can talk about this too, but I've seen the San Jose Sharks. My dad was an affiliate with the team doctor in the 90s and early 2000s, but they've hired a figure skating coach, right? So I remember when I played for USC, Pete Carroll was my coach. He made all the football players, even the linemen, take ballroom dancing. The Niners have a posture. Yeah, the Niners have a posture coach. So it's making athletes more versatile, more functional, more dynamic, right? Instead of just, obviously with the culture and business of sport, everyone's specializing. LeBron James was on Steve Nash's podcast the other day. But he mentioned he sees that, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, that based off the specialization of sport, athletes are drifting away from seasonal sports where they can become more versatile. I mean, if you take any top athlete in the early 2000s or early 90s, they probably played 4 sports when they're in their youth. Nowadays, everyone's playing sports all year round, one sport. So it brings a different aspect of training. And then just like to echo what LeBron said, we see it in our clinic too. Athletes, even the elite ones, they burn out.
Well, on that point, I think if you take Roger Federer, right, in tennis, I think he played like multiple sports when he was growing up, right? Is that right? And he picked tennis, right?
And it shapes you to be Roger Federer. Like when you come to a crossroads where you have to commit to a sport collegiately or professionally, that's when you take all those tools you've deepened in your bag and you've become the person that you've set out to be. But even the veterans, the 10, 12-year-old pros that come in to our team, I always ask them what their regimen is because those are the guys that are succeeding. The rookies who are 1-2 years and out, they sometimes overdo it. But there's pattern recognition, and I think it's great data to understand what they do, the 5 to 10 year pros, and all of them do a mixed blend on the off season, or they try to have like Coach B said, wellness, or I think Mark said it too, wellness. It's doing Pilates or hot yoga, even mixing up their routine so they get something different than just dribbling a basketball or serving with coach all the time. So it's just creating healthy ways to exert and obviously keep their heart rate and fitness levels up.
And on that point, right? I mean, I watched the Serena Williams movie, The Father, right? When he was teaching them how to throw the ball with the football, right?
Yes.
But people were like, "You're crazy. Why are you doing this?" And then there's a reason for that, right?
Yeah. Nolan Ryan, his coach, Tom House, used to. I mean, Nolan Ryan's arguably one of the best pitchers of all time. When he was pitching in his prime, Tom House was his pitching coach. But every time he came to the ballpark, Tom House would make Nolan Ryan warm up with a football because it required the same rotational trunk and hit power, right? But it was heavy. It was a heavier object. So it's just finding healthy, more dynamic alternatives to strengthen them, but to make them more versatile.
Yeah, a great point.
I did the same thing with Aaron Hicks when he was with the Yankees. where we when I started with him, we started playing like we would do routes, football routes, just stuff. Because I mean, he threw the ball 108 miles an hour from outfield to home plate.
Yeah.
So we like, okay, we're going to utilize that and change it up. So at the beginning of the training camp, we'll throw the football, and then we'll even throw the football so he'll run underneath it and catch it. So he learn how to run routes, run with the football routes, right? So he can, because the goal was to teach him how to run. Look at the trajectory of the ball from the bat, and then chase the ball without even seeing which way the ball is going, until you get to that meeting point and then turn around and catch it. And that's what he was. That's what he was known for. So he developed that through catching football, right?
Interesting.
So,
Yeah. Because I think Ryan was talking about versatility,
yeah,
right? You want that, right? Because if something happened, or you got to be versatile, right? Because something is going to be different, right? You're going to be under pressure. How do you react, right? So, hey, the next question I want to ask you guys is, what are the most important biomechanical or neuromuscular factors practitioner should assess to optimize movement quality and reduce injury risk? Anybody has any thoughts on that?
I guess I can go first. One of the main things that I look at are outside of just movement strategies, whether this person is using hip dominant strategies, knee dominant strategies, ankle dominant strategies. Are they flexion bias? Are they extension bias? Like, what is their strategy of movement? Outside of looking at that in regards to like firing patterns, I really, on the table, specifically on the clinical table, I like to look at posterior chain firing patterns. And we should have a certain sequence of firing patterns. So if we're testing the person's ability to lift their right leg into extension off the table and they're laying on their stomach, we want to see certain muscle coordinated actions, right? We don't want to see their lumbar spine activate first and then their hamstring. If we're testing the right side, we want to see the right glute max, we want to see the right hamstring, then the contralateral lumbar spine, and then we're going to go to the ipsilateral lumbar spine, and then so on and so forth. There's multiple other things that we could look at. But you'd be surprised such elite level athletes can perform at such high levels, even with poor patterns, which is amazing, right? But in regards to trying to utilize my skills and what I know in regards to how the body should move, the more that I focus on this in regards to like the preparatory phase before I would hand them off to somebody like Coach B, is I want to make sure that they're firing well on the table, right? Bring them through something as well, a little bit more dynamically, and then prep them for someone like Coach B to take them into a greater intense preparatory phase for their practice. So in regards to, that's what I'm looking at more so in regards to on the table. But then, why is it important? It's because it's giving us information on how this person, or if they can stabilize their pelvis efficiently, right? If the patterns around the pelvis are not firing correctly, how do we have stability? And if there's no stability of the pelvis, well, then how can this athlete differentiate their hips, right? The pelvis has to be stable for the left leg to go into extension, the right leg has to go into flexion, and vice versa. And then it has to do this amongst various ranges of motion and planes of motion. So there's a lot to think about, but those are just two things that I think about and implement on the table before I pass them on to strength and conditioning.
But thank you, Marc. Brijesh, what are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, kind of piggybacking off of what Marc said. I mean, I have a kind of a movement paradigm that I look at when it comes to assessing movement. The first thing I'll ask an athlete, or even give an athlete, whether it be an exercise, is can you first get into position? And so when I talk about position, can you get into a position of emphasis? And so for us, if our number one goal is to try to reduce the chance of injury, we're going to look at, can you get into positions of deceleration? Can you do it unilaterally? Can you do it bilaterally? Can you do it through the upper body? Can you move your scapula? And we can do these through isometrics and different types of exercises that we would develop within a plan. But I think as I've evolved as a coach, the biggest things that have really come to my mind are asking constant questions. Can you feel this? Can you feel that? Can you feel your glute? Can you feel your arch? Can you feel your big toe? And I'll get athletes that come in that might be motor morons, that do not understand how to move their body, do not understand how to feel their body. And they often struggle with when I ask them these questions. But what I found is that when you continuously drill these cues and continue to give these cues, their frontal cortex starts to open up and starts to light up a little bit, and they start to develop this enhanced sense of sense and feel. And I often say, if you can't sense and feel, you cannot control and change. So my job as a coach initially to try to get them from an assessment standpoint. Really, it's qualitative, but it's, can you feel this? Can you feel your glute? Can you feel your quad? Can you feel your foot? And to get them to understand, when you can sense and feel, you can control and change. Great example. We've been doing some lateral speed work with our hockey athletes, and we're in week 3. And some of the drills that we've been doing, a high level athlete, he probably played professionally, didn't quite understand how to create lateral shin angles to be able to help him decelerate, absorb force, or getting to understand that when he pushes, we want to try to keep his forces horizontal and not go vertical, so we can keep the center of mass at some level so he can control it better. Today, I said, how was the lateral speed? He did it with one of my staff, with one of my interns today. And he's like, I could feel what we were talking about 2 weeks ago. And I was able to make that change. Mm-hmm. And that's the types of things that we notice when you work with an athlete for a long period of time, and you develop a rapport, and you constantly ask questions, and you constantly ask for their feedback, that when they start to understand their body at a higher level. And when they can do that, they're working on their craft. And ultimately, in the weight room, there is no technical work, right? We cannot work on a specific skill of shooting or dribbling or shooting a one-timer. Like, it's all physical work. So what we're doing is working on the skill of movement, and to try to enhance their ability to sense and feel their own body, so they can control and change their body and integrate it into their own technical and tactical work.
No, that makes sense. Great comment, Brijesh. Thank you. Anybody else?
Just to echo what these coaches just said, which are excellent points. From my standpoint, I piggyback on what Coach B said and Coach Marc said. To have an athlete to be, we talked about versatility, right? They have to be able to move in a multi-directional pattern. They have to be able to move in a multi-planar fashion. Understanding that sudden changes of acceleration create the stress point or the mechanical stress. If you know that, then we put more emphasis on those movement patterns, such as deceleration, obviously acceleration. If someone has a hamstring injury, what are their stride length in relationship to their leverage point, right? That tipping point. Christian McCaffrey had chronic hamstring injuries. Most of our athletes who have chronic hamstring injuries over the years, you look at their stride length, and a lot of coaches will say, open up their stride, gain ground, and get there with your feet. I would say shorten up the stride in relationship to the leverage and center of mass, almost like a sprinter who leans to start and a sprinter who leans to finish. So understanding those changes in acceleration, landing in sports that require jumping, a lot of jumping, like volleyball and basketball, how is an athlete absorbing their force, right? We talk about versatility. The athletes in my program that are most versatile are actually gymnasts. Think about gymnastics. Gymnasts require four different events, which require 4 different sets of skills. If you take Simone Biles, she can do the splits. She has excellent proprioception on the beam, right? She has to do beam, bar, vault, and floor. That doesn't make them the best athletes. I would say it makes them more well-rounded, though. She can do the splits. She can support her own body weight, right? She's pound for pound very strong. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. I think if athletes understand that, cutting, planting, from a non-contact ACL standpoint, we categorize ACLs into 2 categories, non-contact and contact. The non-contact category, you have to look at the athlete's center of mass in relationship to their base of support. On a hyperextended knee, are they cutting and planting with their center of mass posterior to their base of support on knee extension? And if that's the case, you tell them it's not what you're actually doing with your feet, it's what you're not doing with your head and shoulders and your upper body that gets you in trouble. So we tell athletes to shorten up their stride, versus opening up their stride, right? And then we tell them to lean with their upper body. It's like if I was to tell one of Coach Sillah's tennis players, like, what's the fastest way to get to the net? I would say it's not fastest first step, because if you go think feet first, your center of mass is behind you. It's actually fastest first lean, right? So I would say get your head to the net. Let your head upper body dictate your stride length, right? And not taken away from your hip or leg preload or anything like that. But I would say intentionally and with purpose, athletes need to start changing.
Makes sense. Hey, guys, so I know, Brijesh, you got to go. We can cut that. I'm just talking to you guys. There's 3 questions left. What do you guys want to do? Just pick one of the 3? What do you guys want to do?
You guys can also keep going too, and I'll just respectfully just jump off.
Okay, so I'll ask
Because
the
this
next
has been great.
I ask you
Yeah.
first. So next question to you guys is, how do you guys, well, actually, Abdul, you didn't answer that question.
No, I mean, there's not much to say because they cover all grounds, actually. I mean, Ryan, Dr. Ryan came in and basically covered the other end of it, right? That actually was really interesting, is about changing your stride length instead of, I mean, everyone usually say open up your stride length. Actually, him talking about that, one of the things that I used to have problem with track was I had chronic hamstring issues, especially when we went to state, is because of that. And that's where I learned how to actually adjust my stride length, not the typical long strided extend. I had to adjust to actually and hold the speed to not accelerate after a certain point, right? So that's why when he tagged on that part, I'm like, that's perfect.
Yeah, that makes sense. But thank you, Abdul. Hey, next question, and I asked Brijesh that question first. How do you guys approach movement retraining or repartnering with elite athletes who already performed at the highest level, but they have asymmetries or inefficiencies, right? It's very hard to tell an athlete who's been at the highest level, hey, you got to learn how to run again. You're doing it wrong because everybody's going to get hurt every single time. So anybody has any thoughts? I mean, I'm going to ask you, Brijesh, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer ultimately depends. I remember Charlie Francis said this a long time ago, and Charlie Francis is a world-renowned track coach. He would say, if it's not broke, don't try to fix it, because everybody has their own kind of movement signature to what makes them them. And for me, like, I've gone down different rabbit holes and thinking that we can try to fix every asymmetry, and we can't do it. The body's naturally asymmetrically designed. You're never going to be able to fix an asymmetry, and some sort of patterness are things that often make athletes elite because they're so good at their ability to get into one hip more so than the other hip. What I'm trying to do is ultimately give them movement variability, give them the ability to shift from one side of their body to the other side of the body, make sure that they can internally rotate on both hips so they can ultimately externally rotate, make sure that they can dorsiflex their ankles so they can ultimately decelerate. So that's what we're looking to do. Again, in a college setting, we do have limited time. So we're not often afforded all the opportunities to probably will try to really fix and enhance somebody's movement inefficiency or somebody's movement deficiencies. What I found is that by trying to cleaning things up, by giving them a little bit more core stability, sequencing different exercises in a certain way that we can drive the desired outcomes and desired movement changes that we want to create, utilizing isometrics, utilizing eccentrics, utilizing different loading structures are the things that I've found over my course of time to really enhance an athlete's ability to move more efficiently. When it comes to rehabilitation and retraining, isometrics are our bread and butter, is where we typically start. It gives the brain more time to sense and feel those positions, as I mentioned before. But sometimes you may not want to fix every asymmetry.
It's like saying, it's not exactly like running, but if you take Nikola Jokic from the Nuggets, he's got this weird shooting, right? You got, it works for him, but for some people, it's just so strange. You're not gonna go and tell you got to change the way you shoot.
Larry Bird was similar too.
Yeah. No, great point. Thank you, Brijesh. Anybody else? Have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, great points, Coach. And to piggyback off that, let's take an example of an NFL punter. They only kick with, let's say they only kick with the right leg. If you get them on the table, their pelvic asymmetry might seem off, depending on what school of thought you're from, right? Their hamstring length on one side is going to be different than the other. Their quad length is going to be different from the other. Their oblique, symmetry is going to be different, right? If a swimmer only breathes to one side, they're going to have asymmetries. So it's, for that NFL punter, I don't think I'm going to be worrying about releasing this and lengthening that because he's already at the NFL. These asymmetries, like Coach B said, is the reason why he's there. Now, the question is whether these asymmetries are causing an issue is the next question, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. But if you really do believe that these asymmetries are an issue and it's a deterrent to the athlete's current and long-term success, then it comes down to education to the athlete of like, hey, like, let's take a step back and realize what are we trying to achieve, right? For me, myself, I don't care what type of athlete you are. I believe everyone should be able to carry out single leg squats. All right. Most of our life is carried out on one leg, right? 80% of a gait is on one leg, right? So it's just you could take an athlete who could back squat 350 and it looks really strong, but you put them on a single leg and they're like a bamboo tree that's not rooted in the ground. They could just fall over in the wind. So it goes back to just the communication and education of, hey, we perform at an elite level with everything that you have given us, right? But if we think that these asymmetries are an issue and a deterrent to you, I think we should educate this way, communicate why we're going to implement this, and then we reevaluate. At the end of the day, it's also the athlete's decision. We can't make them do something. We're support staff, and we just have to guide by the side, and hopefully they trust us enough to create some change.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, that reminds me of the conversation we had, with you, Ryan, with your dad. I think you took the example of Odell Beckham, the football player, who hurt himself, I think ACL injury, when he caught the ball, right? And your comment was, are you going to go and tell him, you should really change the way you run? Because I think your comment was, he's going to catch the ball anyway. If you're winning a championship, he's going to do it most of the time, right? So is that?
Yeah, it's echoing the fact that Coach B talked about movement signatures, which is a great analogy because if you just think about how individuals write, everyone has a different signature, but we all know how to read and write. So everyone moves differently. That's why through pattern recognition, it's our job as sports performance movement specialists to teach these kids or these adults or these athletes to refine their movement to make it more efficient. Any counterproduction or maladaptive body position while they cut, plant, change direction, or decelerate or land, that's what you can refine, and often subtle, but yet so significant, right? In terms of the intention behind the movement. We always do drills where we call them M&Ms, movement and mindset, right? Because you can't aimlessly, robotically go through drills. So we always try to incorporate, like Coach said, like how can we test the frontal cortex and throw out cues or movement patterns to trigger a reactive response through situational gameplay, right? Or match play. So it's not a one size fits all. Everyone moves different, but it's acknowledging these movement patterns. And if there's strength and conditioning coaches out there listening, we would say that our program is supplemental to, we're just one piece of the wheel well, I would say. We're not saying that it's like our way or no way. It's just saying, look, you can integrate movement patterns into your existing program and regimen and acknowledge, like, look, this will make you more functional, like a one-legged squat. I worked out a football team yesterday, first time. It was a college team, Division I athletes. I had them hold a 12-pound grip bell, which is a cross hybrid between a dumbbell and a kettlebell, right here underneath their chin, with their knuckles up, had them dorsiflex and knee drive their leg up off a one-legged move, and statically, I would say 80% of them fell over. So it's just creating movement patterns that are static and functional and dynamic off of one foot, like Coach Marc said, it's how many times are we off of one foot when we actually compete? All the time. Think about if Serena was running and doing a backhand or a forehand, she might look like a dancer on a still shot, right? Or a motion capture. So it's being able to situationally train these movement patterns so that it translates to their respective sport.
Makes sense. Yeah, great comments. Maybe one last comment, Abdul. Any thoughts on that too?
No, not really. They hit it all on the nose as far as that's concerned. And we don't want to the thing about it, it's like you said, everyone has a different like fingerprints and signature. And from an early age, you have to know your pattern, right? And it is at that moment, to me, that's the foundational. That's the foundation. That's where all these things are done and set. And anything beyond that is like we really. That's when you hire or you contract the specialized folks to actually work on the efficiency of everything. But at that point in time, you actually still fight. For me, in a way, I think you're fighting against time at that moment, right? Because then you're fighting against habits and you're fighting against guys that are making millions and they're set in their ways, talking about now they're debating with you and arguing with you, right? But like coaches said, it's about educating them at that point and letting them know. So even when they get to that other elite level, when they contract someone, that debate won't be there. They have a better understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, great points. Next question. I got two more. Which tools and technologies and methodology are you guys the most excited about right now for evaluating or enhancing movement in elite settings? I'm going to ask you first again, Brijesh. What are your take on that as well?
My eyes and my ears. They're my biggest tools that I use every single day, and I work on developing them each and every single day. But they are the things that help me understand my athletes, the people that I get to work with on a regular basis. I constantly ask them questions. How do you feel? What do you notice? And that gives me feedback. And then through that feedback, I can make adjustments to their programming, or prescriptions to what we need to do that day or that week. And then my eyes, just by watching movement, anytime I watch athletics, I watch sports, I look at pictures, understanding movements, looking at angles, and trying to teach and use that with the athletes that we do with whatever any exercise or drills that we may do in training. But the biggest tech that I use are my eyes and my ears. I think I don't have access to force plate, but I think that would be something really nice to be able to have in the future. But right now, it's my eyes and my ears.
Yeah, thank you, Brijesh. I'm going back to you, Abdul. What are your take on that? Just your eyes and your instinct, or what is it?
Yes, instinct, eyes and ears. I mean, I'm old school, and I'll use. I mean, I don't mind using like the force plate. I love things gadgets like that. Actually, I enjoy it, but most of the time it's the eyes and ears that I enjoy the most, because the creativity, the instinct. Because I don't want to lose that, right? That's what makes us who we are. That's what makes us special. And for me, if you can, like, let me say, Dr. Ryan or Marc, someone comes in there, they look at them right away, boom, they know exactly what's happening right away. Or what the moment they start doing, making movements or doing, performing some exercises, they know the force is off. Something is off, right? They can put their eyes on it. To me, that's what keeps us sharp. It makes us continuously, and it keeps us engaged, not lazy.
Yeah, it's like I'll take the example. Like my son is dreaming to be a D1 basketball player, NBA player, right? I got him a coach. He works with like NBA players, right? And he said after 5 minutes, he told my son, I can tell what he's doing wrong. Footwork is wrong. Something is not, he's not doing it right. And I said, I've never heard a coach telling me this. Nobody ever seen this because they don't know. But if you got the experience, if you coach the right way, you know what top elite athletes have to do as far as the motion, the footwork, everything, right?
Absolutely. You know, piggybacking off of what Coach Abdul said is like the body tells a story. You know, you show up to the court. I'm sure there are times where he's had his players where he sees that movement is off, and depending on what he's seeing, he could say, okay, the backhand for my player is going to be tough today. You know, then, you know, do you make changes, or, you know, that's up to coach. But the body tells a story, and it's our job to read the story that's in front of us, especially if we're hired by these people to help them perform at those levels. But it really is amazing what, without any words, what the body and body language, what it tells you.
No,
Yes.
that's a great point. Ryan, any thoughts on
Yeah.
that as well?
Yeah, I think I'm just excited to see what we do with the data. As technology advances, can we align with technology and leverage it? Coach was saying, you can't fix what you can't see, right? So you have to see it in real time. So if we use video motion capture to analyze joints, symmetry, asymmetries, if we can capture it in real time and leverage that technology to translate it to the athlete that's in front of us, I mean, as coaches, it'll make our job more efficient. But if anything, I would hate to see technology slow coaches that are quote unquote more old school, who do it with their eyes. Because obviously, if you have a sharp eye, you can see everything, like Coach Sillah. So if you can leverage technology to capture it, explain it, and break it down through film studies or even just real time, I think that's what I'm most excited for the future. What will practitioners and coaches do with the data?
Yes. Yes.
Makes sense. Hey, one last question. I know, Abdul, you got to go. I ask you first. How do you guys effectively communicate complex movement data or even feedback, right, to coaches and athletes and ensure it drive meaningful change in training or performance? Because they've got their own egos, right? You're not going to tell Serena, you know what, you got to change the way you hit your forehead, right? I mean, she'd be like, what are you talking about, right? So, Abdul, what is your style of communication to coaches and stuff like that?
So, and I mean, unlike Dr. Ryan and Mark here, I don't have this background, right? I don't have this extensive educational background from as far as kinesiology, medical school. I'm a psychologist. That's where I come from. I went to school to be a psychologist. So this is where it comes into play for me. It's very easy when folks ask, how is it possible that you're able to get these athletes to perform and achieve all these things about through communication? It's just because every human being has a way to get to them. I don't care who they are, whether they're the hardest of hardened criminals or they're the youngest athletes. You just have to study, observe, and understand and listen. And then you know how to communicate with every human being and you know how to get to them, because at the end of the day, it is about their goal, is what are they willing to endure to achieve their goal? What are they willing to crucify themselves to achieve this goal? So it is up to you to help them understand and see that, right? Once you help them see that, because about inspiring them and motivating them, because not for you, the spotlight is on them. So you just have to help them see that within themselves. And then the communication is not about barking at them and telling them, speaking down at them or speaking at them. It's about teaching them, showing them.
And so you really have to understand the athlete,
Yes.
how to communicate. For example, I think Abdul, you told me the first time you remember you worked with Serena, she was wearing a headset, and she said, "If I'm going to work with you, no headset when I'm talking to you."
Yes.
And she said, and she never forgot.
Never forgot. Even 15 years down the line, her and I were talking and doing something, and she won. She won. I forgot which trophy she won, and we started cooling down. And she said, "Is it possible to wear?" This is when all this new age thing came out. "Is it possible to wear this?" I said, "Oh, you remember?" She said, "I'll never forget. I know your rules." I said, "Okay." And that made me smile, because here she is now making $33 million a year, right? I'm like, you still remember the rules when we're making anything, right? So that kind of made me happy, saying, you know what, that's a true champion, because champion is a champion because they understand what it takes to be a champion.
But they're also humble too. You
Very
think
humble.
that,
Very.
but she wants to win, so she'll do whatever it takes to win.
Yes, absolutely.
Makes sense. Mark or Ryan, any thoughts on that as well? Communication.
Yeah, that was beautiful, and thank you for sharing that story. But it also just shows, when you're entering a coaching session, how much intention Coach Sillah has, entering that session and setting a boundary, because many coaches have trouble setting boundaries, especially with elite athletes, because of course they want to continue to work with these people, right?
Mhm.
But as a respect to the craft and the game, and having then an intentional session, well, hey, we have to be focused here. So I really appreciate that. But in regards to a little bit more of what Coach said, is that it's education and teaching them and showing them why. For example, like my specialty is coming from when somebody's injured, and I work with them before they go to their sport coach. And I'm not helping them at their sport, I'm helping them move to create the desired motions at hand for their sport. So for like tennis, there's different sounds in which the ball makes on the racket, right? If the footwork is proper, if mechanics are proper, the sound is going to be better than if mechanics were improper. I was working with martial artists, and I have no martial art background. And I was watching him kick the bag, the heavy bag. And I asked him for permission if I could just intervene and say one thing.
Mhm.
And it wasn't about the kicking leg, it was about his stationary leg. And I noticed that his great toe, his big toe, was extending off the ground. And I said, can you do me a favor and try and keep your big toe on the ground while you kick this bag? And he kicked it, and the bag flew like he hasn't seen it fly before. And he said, how did you know? I've been fighting for so many years and nobody has picked this up. And going back to observation, that's what I was looking at, right? That big toe, if he's trying to create power off of this stabilization leg, we know how important the great toe is in regards to proprioception and stability up the entire chain. So I always go back to the tree example. If the tree is not rooted in the ground, we're going to have issues. So that goes back to showing the athlete, hey, can we just do one little thing? And if it works, great. But if it works, they're going to feel a difference. And then that's where their buy-in comes in, but if they, if the cue at hand wasn't good for the athlete, okay, then we'll forget about it. But when it is the correct cue in the right time, the athlete is going to realize, wow, that felt different. And the reaction of the bag was different than he's ever seen in his entire career. So, you're not telling the person, you're just educating them and showing them.
But because you pay attention, right? And he was like, well, you saw it different, therefore he's more willing to listen to you. So you almost like you have some really good listening skills, right?
Yeah, the active listening, and then it's the intention. What are we trying to achieve here? And that's what I find the best coaches do, is when they're coaching, they're intentional. Every word that they use when they're coaching is intentional. There's no wasted words. When you cue an exercise or a desired movement, you can't have 5 sentences to describe the biomechanical change you want to achieve. It's 1 or 2 words, an analogy here, an analogy there, and boom, we're creating a change. So it's intentional word choices, intentional coaching, and active listening.
For sure. Yeah, no, great points, Mark. Thank you. Ryan, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, excellent points, Mark. I think and just to reiterate, just from my standpoint, similar concepts, that it's to coach it's an art of coaching, right? There's timing, there's delivery. It's how well can you resonate with the athlete. But going back to what Mark said about the why, if we empower them on the why and then show them how, we answer those 2 questions, you have traction for change. And if you solidify it and back it up by science and data, then it's essentially bulletproof, right? So I think that's back to my original statement about objective measurables, parents or athletes who want the objective findings in the measurables for peak performance, those are great, but it's how well can we use that data to empower what we're doing. I don't think necessarily Coach Sillah, Coach Marc, or Coach B necessarily needs data, especially if you're an old school coach like Coach Sillah, but it will just empower what the trend is and what all this data that's moving forward is going to help us reiterate our craft. I think that's another thing. So if we can empower the athlete, we can show them how, answer the questions why, I think motivating them and just being consistent with what we're doing. I had an NFL linebacker come in. He was from the 49ers. I won't mention his name, but I mean, NFL athletes, pro athletes, they have egos, right? So it's finding that line where respectfully you're integrating your knowledge to help craft their skills or to refine their technique that's creating the stress point, and teaching them, like Coach Marc just said. But it's I said to him, I never got you, or I'm taking credit for the fact that I got you to the NFL, right? Because I'm now seeing him post-op. So I was like, so-and-so, I'm not taking credit for getting you into the NFL. I'm trying to show you healthy alternatives, give you healthy adjustments in your stance and your leverage to keep you in the NFL. So it's going back to being more efficient, less counterproductive, and just making them acknowledge what they're doing. And if they're receptive to it, then we can move mountains and the sky's the limit. If not, then they might be injury prone for the rest of their career.
And obviously, if you were telling them and it works, like the foot that Marc was talking about, right? If they see an impact like right away, of course they're gonna be more receptive. But maybe sometimes they don't see the result right away, so they're still kind of doubting, does it even work? Is it gonna work? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But look, we at the end of the podcast, man. Thank you for your time today and great conversation. So, thank you guys.
Thanks, Julian, for having us. Thanks, Marc.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Doc.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To access past episodes and other research, articles, and analysis of sports technology, please visit our website, theupside.us. Subscribe to the Upside newsletter and receive full access to our sports tech business letter and website. Royalty-free music is provided by ibaudio.com. The Upside podcast provides timely insights and interviews with global leaders in sports technology. Until next time, keep looking to the upside.